I guess because we have so many forms of silk. And we also had an awful lot of questions from participants there about what the different types of silk were and how to use them. So we thought it would be helpful to put together a little video showing the various forms of silk that are available here, and also give you some ideas as to how you can use. Carrier rods are sort of a new form of silk to me. What the carrier rod is a byproduct of the silk reeling industry. And this is what they look like, and you can see that they're sort of scrunched up like an accordion, and if I pull it out like this, it just zips right back almost like a piece of elastic. And they're dyed, but because it falls back on itself and is like an elastic, when it's dyed, you get sort of a resist technique, almost like a natural shibori. So you'll see as we work with this later in both felting and spinning that you get an interesting play of the color that you've dyed it along with the natural white of the silk, because it isn't dyed so thoroughly through, soaked so thoroughly through. Anyway, the carrier rods, as I mentioned, are a byproduct of the reeling of silk. Apparently there's a piece of equipment called a carrier rod on the reeling equipment that they use in the silk industry. And when they're unreeling the cocoon and to produce reeled silk, some of the filaments get caught around this one piece of the equipment, which is called the carrier rod on the equipment. And so the silk that gets caught on the carrier rod of the equipment while they're reeling, they reclaim, and that's why they're called carrier rods. This is actually the silk that just by mistake during the process got caught on that piece of equipment. But it's still quite usable and really sort of fun to work with. So the first thing I do with it, whether I'm spinning with it or felting with it, is gradually tease it out. And I'm going to show you that here. And you can attenuate it to whatever length or narrowness, width that you would like to work with. But you can see, maybe if I get up a little closer, as I pull it out, there's a little bit of resistance, and yet you need to pull sort of firmly enough to overcome the resistance, and yet not so firmly that you pull it apart like that. So this is how you would start to work with the carrier rod, by just gradually stretching each rod out to a uniform, if that's what you want, diameter. Okay, so here was some carrier rod that I stretched out, and then just as an example, I laid it on the surface of some partial felts to see how it felted, and it felted in very readily and very easily. And because it's really simple to ease a curve into the carrier rod form, it lends itself really nicely to getting these curvilinear forms. And you'll notice that because of the texture of it, you get an interesting surface texture on the felt. And if I can bring this up a little bit closer, maybe you can even see that the texture comes out not only on the edges, where you get some interesting texture, but there is some surface texture as well. And of course, because they're dyed, and it takes the dye differentially, you get an interesting play of colors. So really simple to felt with. You just tease the carrier rod out to the desired thickness, lay it down on your fiber, and proceed with your normal felting technique, and it adheres very readily, very firmly, and just provides a nice sort of texture. It also provides some sheen or luster, though I'm not sure that you can appreciate that through this video, but it does add a nice contrast to the dull mattness of the wool to have the sheen of the carrier rod on the surface. We're on. Okay, so here's an example of some yarn spun using the carrier rod. And you can see, if you look closely at this, that there's quite a bit of surface texture on this yarn, and it's a really easy yarn to spin into a slub yarn if you want to add some thick and thin aspects to your yarn. So it gives surface texture even if you spin it nice and smoothly like this. It has some interesting surface texture and also a nice variation in color, but you can also add these slubs. So let me show you how I was doing that. So I already pre-drafted the carrier rod. Oops, getting a little thin there. Okay, and it's just, if you can see how It's really quite easy to spin. It's very short though, so it takes a little getting used to a technique for spinning it nice and smoothly. It's very easy to spin in slub if you want, which is kind of a fun yarn as well. But it's a short fiber, so you can see how close my hands are. My drafting zone is quite small actually, because it is a very short fine fiber.